That's what scares us the most about this whole thing, and then talking about bringing leachate back into St. Cloud, is we have had such little transparency with the city as far as the water issue is concerned. To think, and I respect that you know, we do want the information. We want to know what's going on. We want transparency. But can we count on City Hall for that? We haven't seen that thus far.
That's the big question in blinking neon lights.
Yeah.
Listen, I think that the actual utilities workers,
well, they're doing a great job. Yeah.
Right.
You know, and I just don't think that they're even receiving the transparency that's necessary to make sure this is being handled properly.
Well, to make a decision on whether or not you really want to be exposed to it.
Right.
Essentially.
And, you know, Dave said, oh, you know, he feels great about them being able to properly treat this. He's comfortable with that now. But we have Toho, which is a much larger entity, not even willing to take that process on. Now, we can't even seem to figure out the resin in the water. So now we're going to add a huge project and take resources away from the utilities company where we need them. I mean, I would say equally, but we don't have the staff or the knowledge to truly be able to handle it all at once. I mean, and as someone who's fought for the water, it's a little disheartening to even think that they would consider breaking those resources in half to have to tackle two issues when they can't even get a handle on one with 100% people focused on it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
It's just...
Well, and I think one of the things that Michael brought up that was pertinent that I think that needs to be readdressed is the overbuilding and bringing more things in and bringing more to the dump and not allowing
more stresses on the infrastructure.
Well, and I think truthfully, in the long run, like we've said before, like I've said before, even to council, one of the things is I don't care how much money you're willing to replace my appliances and things like that for. My health is my ultimate long time. That's the one thing that you can't correct.
Right.
Once that's gone, it's gone. And then two, you know, everybody's body is slightly different. What's going to happen to a potential, you know, a mother carrying a baby? Is it more harmful to them versus maybe, you know, to someone who's not, or to a woman, to a man, to a child? What is, I mean, I don't know, personally, it's terrifying to think about the fact that we're breathing it in and then we're going to be drinking it in and eating it in.
The one beautiful thing about Florida that a lot of other states don't have is the ability to bring something called a medical monitoring case against an entity, which would force that entity to pay for long-term medical checkups based on a panel of experts. So a panel of experts would be brought in and they would make a decision on how long, you know, an entity would have to pay for medical monitoring for citizens in a situation like this. It's not a very common thing, but Florida does allow it. So, I mean, if we're asking and asking and asking for transparency and information and we're not receiving that, well, then sometime maybe we have to put our, you know, that other foot forward and demand, you know, a medical monitoring case at the bare minimum. Because I have a 3-year-old son and I'm terrified of what's happening in this town. And I don't want to get too much into, you know, details right now, but I definitely think that the city could even, how much would it take them to put forward and say, hey, you know what, we're going to medically monitor people to make sure that what we're telling you is the truth. They'll never do it unless their hand is forced.
Well, and I think the thing is too, like I said, you know, going forward again, we don't know the long-term effects. We haven't known the long-term effects. And so the problem that I think what frustrates me the most is you bring in an expert, like they brought in the expert from UCF, and a week later they contradicted exactly what was supposedly found, that there wasn't any issues. But
inches of resin in the tank.
Correct. Yeah. And meanwhile, this whole time, we've, you know, been called liars, so forth, yada, yada. But so what are we going to come up with in the beginning? It's going to be, is it going to be, well, you know, it's this. And then further down the line, it's going to be far more severe.
You know what? You know what's funny about that, with that whole professor situation, and I can't help but talk about this, but it was funny to me that he came out and he said there's no problem at the plant. But our local news media, including the Osceola News Gazette and that rag that we have here in town, is that even around anymore? I don't even know. Is that around? I mean, who knows? But they came out and said St. Cloud declares the water is safe.
So
That's not what happened. That's not
So
what was said,
irresponsible.
and that was not what was in the story. The story, the professor said that the water at the plant, there's no issue at the plant.
Said there was no leaking out of the plant anymore, and he said that the raw material was safe.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
That was
So-
it. Which is okay. We were pretty sure that they had fixed the problem at the plant, but we forced their hand into making sure that they were a 10,000% positive it wasn't still leaking.
Right.
That's the exact number.
Right.
And
That's what
We
they sent
already
in the
knew.
divers into the tank.
they just did that. That's when they
Yeah.
found the inches of resin.
The variance in the resin, and in fact,
Yeah.
they admitted that it was leaking in the south part of town, which is where Brandy and I live, and that's why we've probably been affected so deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we already knew that the raw resin was approved for the water treatment process. And I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. That has never, ever been my concern.
Which is the same here with the leaching.
So
Right.
technically, they're not lying when they say the resin is safe. Yes, if it's being processed properly,
Mhm.
but that's not.
Well, that's
not
like
what
saying the coal ash is safe, but the leachate is not. Essentially, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you said, when it's a change, when it's a breakdown, it's a chemical change.
Yeah,
You know.
and that happens over time with anything.
Correct.
You know, it's
Correct.
I mean, nobody would argue with you if you said landfill leachate is toxic.
Yeah.
Well, clearly.
Without even
Yeah.
considering coal ash.
yeah.
You can Google that, and
Yeah.
it comes up. And
Why would
actually,
they?
I'm
Why
going
do
to
you
put
think
that
they
up
put
for you
liners
guys,
underneath them?
so you can see at home what Google has to say about leachate or garbage juice.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's I mean, when it's called garbage juice.
Yeah. Don't drink it.
Garbage juice.
And to say also Google, but also Google Scholar. You can find some good research articles on leachate.
Right.
If you don't go on Google Scholar instead.
And thanks to Osceola Fights Back, because they've actually done a lot of research and a lot of hard work, and you said you would share some of your information with us to be able to provide a link to and to put up and things like
Well,
that.
they have a group. We'll put a link to your group up there
Yeah.
so that people can join, so they can really get involved because I think this is equally as important as the resin in the water issue at this point.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
And information is, powerful.
Right.
It makes for a better decision, and it makes for an educated decision. And so, Michael, to go back to one of the things we talked about, what would be your advice for anybody who would want to get involved to go ahead if this ends up becoming another issue? How would you recommend that citizens who don't want this in the community get involved?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one because reading that link is where it starts. Because a lot of people think, well, maybe it's been, like I said before, we've been taking this for years and they don't really know. I didn't know anything about leachate until we got involved in this. So, I mean, Osceola Fights Back, that one group that we have, start getting involved and asking questions. And but don't just, like, if you see a comment, don't try to fight it. Just ask a question, get more information. The goal is to learn and get information, not to be you're right or somebody's wrong. No, none of this is about that. Not even in the city.
Right.
We don't expect the city council to be experts on any of this stuff.
Right.
So with the input of citizens, and
We
then
just want to be able to work together.
work together on it. That's it. That's all we want to do.
Right.
That's
You know,
it.
and I'm sorry, but I'm willing to take factual proof of what's going on in North Carolina, what's going on in Puerto Rico. Based
Well,
on
it is.
Coal Ash.
Yes.
I'm willing
that
to
is the
take
proof.
that over a jeweler
Exactly.
and a pastor telling me something is safe.
Well,
You know, there's documented proof that this is a concern.
Exactly.
And-
So there is documented proof.
A really good.
And to your point too,
Yeah.
with water, and I said this to Tom many times, my background is in electronic engineering, and I work with a guy who works for Q's. I don't know if you ever heard of Q's Incorporated. Okay, so what I kept asking is why, before we even do the ice digging, why didn't we have robots go through the pipes? And I actually contacted Q's. In fact, on my phone, I've got a Spanish key. and he wanted to talk to me about it. They do make equipment. Now, mainly it's for drainage. That's where it started, but they have equipment for looking at water pipes.
Diagnostics.
You think that's what they
To
decided
see
to do
what's
now?
going. Now they decided to do that.
Well, it's just
After the
like,
fact.
it's just like
After almost 6 years.
after
yeah.
5.5 years, they finally said, "Oh, we're gonna get the resin tested." I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but to any normal person, that would be number one.
Number one, right?
And then
exactly.
if you're gonna do pigging, if you're gonna be cleaning pipes, you start at the main line and go out. You
Yeah.
don't do everything behind the main line and then come back and do the main line and then wonder why people still have a problem. It's
Well,
and you make test
mind
points.
blowing.
They know the schematic of the pipes,
exactly.
so you know the test points where you can centralize it and or isolate it to certain areas.
Well, and I feel like had they been super transparent in the beginning, they could have reached out to the citizens of the city and said, guys, where does it seem to be the most affected?
Right.
Let's start from there and let's go forth to a certain pattern. And just from people reaching out to us via this page, we've started to, how do I want to say, track the migration, essentially.
Yeah.
And having had conversations with Marjorie, and having conversations with even Councilman Trace, who did his own research, you start to see there's a reason why it started to migrate a certain way. It actually started to migrate towards the commercial portion of our town, heading north, which would have been like to Publix and to
Walmart.
some of the grocery stores and some of the commercial areas where they pull a lot of water through.
Yeah.
Right.
So it makes sense. So to go back to that situation, like we said, maybe there should have been a better process. But one of the other things too is this. Like, I want to make it very clear, like you said, and like you said, it's not working against the city by any stretch of the
No, it's working for the
imagination.
city.
I feel like maybe they were even bamboozled a little bit about what they were getting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But knowing this situation is slightly different than the My Ex-Resin situation because there is more research and there is more information available to us at hand. This is something that I would like to see.
Yeah.
I would like to see someone who has no vested interest
Right.
come in and do a an unbiased test.
Yeah.
Because as someone who's going to be consuming it down the line, I think we have the most vested interest, which is our health.
Right.
Yeah.
So really what we want is low-level metals testing on the effluent coming out of the plant to make sure your irrigated water doesn't have contamination.
So, I guess to wrap things up, you can Google leachate and see for yourself what it says. I mean,
I had to.
yeah, with the issues that we have with water in St. Cloud, the last thing we need to do is talk about bringing this back and processing it at our wastewater treatment plant. At least in my book, that's what I think. I think we're all on the same page here. If you're interested in Osceola Fights Back, you can find them on Facebook. I'm going to post a link to their group, underneath this video. And if this goes before the council, I will definitely let people know because people need to get involved. And that's how we get things done is if you get involved, you speak out, you come out to the meetings and say, hey, I don't want this. It's when you're not speaking out and you're not paying attention
Stuff
that
slips through.
that things slip through. So,
Yeah. I mean, we're all fighting the same battle in different instances, and I think that the more people that get involved and the more people that really know the truth about what's going on, it's going to get us very far. So I'm very appreciative of you guys coming in and talking and really
thank you guys.
breaking
Thank you.
everything down because people need to know. People need to know because people still need to know about the water.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we look forward to asking Miss Ariel to come back and kind of break down some of the water things too, to kind of to do that. And so your background is huge for us. And one of the things, like I said, I can't stress enough what Ariel said. We don't want to work against, we want to work with.
Right.
And that's why I feel like if we can literally all get on the same page and get the same education, I think I would like to think that our council would have our interest at heart. Because living in the community, it affects them too in the long run.